I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Girish, if you can turn on your video and say hello just to check whether we can see you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Girish.
Okay, good. Nice to see you, Girish. Thanks for joining. So, folks, Girish works as he's currently head of product management at Freshworks. I'm sure many of you in India have heard of Freshworks. It's India's largest B2B SaaS company offering products in the area of customer engagement. I guess, you know, the category has been changing for a long time, you know, moving from CRM to customer engagement management, and now moving towards customer experience. So I'm sure, you know, Freshworks has some amazing products, both on the sales side and the support side. So Girish heads the product management for the support business unit. So before that, Girish actually, you know, pretty interesting. He transitioned from embedded software experience at Cisco, and also was a co-founder of a company that created a software product for civil engineers, right? So which is fascinating. Maybe we will ask him why that passion of creating a product to solve problems for civil engineers, probably in the area of estimation and anything. Then I guess he moved into mobile CRM, and now he's heading the product management at Freshdesk. I believe, Girish, you also are an investor. Looks like there was some news just a few days ago that you made some investment in an interesting startup. You know, I'll leave it up to you if you want to mention that later, but always good to see folks like you encouraging and helping, you know, early stage startup companies to grow into successful companies. So with that, you know, Girish, over to you. If you can, you know, begin. The topic for today, of course, is building moments of wow in data-driven products. Yes, we can see your slide deck, and let's go on with that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sai, for the introduction. And not really an investor. Warren Buffett is an investor, and probably like what my LinkedIn title should say, investment enthusiast. So with that, thanks a lot for the introduction. And I know this is the beginning of the data track for the IPL webinar season, right? So my talk is going to be a little bit thought-provoking from data perspective, because I'm starting with what I call as moment of wow, and why sometimes it's hard to build for moments of wow in business products, and what it really takes to build products for that, right? So you'll see this is both about data and not about data at the same time. I'm hoping it is thought-provoking, and I look forward to all the conversation post the
absolutely
brief on the topic as well, right?
Yeah.
So hello everyone. I was wondering, because this is an online event that has moved to an offline event, what is the most non-awkward way to start? And I took refuge in XKCD, as I generally do when I'm faced with an awkward situation. So you can all see how I think the situation is. So once again, hi to everyone. Right? Okay. So, so what do I mean as moments of wow? Simply put, if you think of our life in general, we always think of a well-lived life is all about memories. If you're 40 years old, when you think of your last 20 years, you probably don't remember everything that happened in your life. You remember some moments, right? You remember those memories that made you happy, where you felt that you were pleasantly surprised, sometimes shocked, where you felt let down, or so you only remember those moments, and those are really the high points and low points of your life. And products are a lot like that. When you engage with products, you can use it for a day, you can use it for 10 years. All you'll remember is sometimes did the product ever make you frustrated a little bit? Did it really put a smile on your face? I'm sure almost all of us now thank Gmail now that they've started filling the first name of people, right? So if you just type hi and whatever name you have in the two, they auto suggest it and it's just a tab away. Now that puts a smile to your face. When you think about it, you feel so much happy because it also saves you embarrassment. It saves you embarrassment as a consumer of the product, makes you look smart, that you don't get the names wrong, right? So that's a very small thing. If you really think in the context of Gmail and all of the 100 things that they'll need to build, it's probably a small thing, but really did put a smile to your face. So you think of Gmail, the product, and the next time you look at another email client, this is probably one of the things you might miss, right? So that's what I mean by moments. These are small moments. These are moments of wow that you will remember and you'll keep with you. And these necessarily don't need to be large features. This can also be a really key functionality, but it can also be something small, right? So that's what I mean as moments of wow. And through probably the next 30 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about how do products look at it, why sometimes it's difficult to build for these moments of wow. And as a product manager, how can you think about it? Like with most things, this is a framework. You can, it doesn't apply to everyone at the same level, but I do think there are interesting ideas that you can take away irrespective of what type of product you're managing, right? Be it direct to consumer or a business software. So I started this saying business software doesn't need to be boring. And why I call that out specifically is that if you really look at the last 20 years of all software development, really after computers started coming into every space, you first got it to a point where it just needed to be functional. So if you're doing something with pen and paper, or if you're filing stuff away in a folder, you wanted to digitize that because it's easier to maintain. It is a very functional need. But then once the functional need is met, then you have the urge to make it better to use, to make it not boring. If you really look at that whole history and where we are today, almost every business user of a product expects a product to be not boring. And it's very hard because as a business, you're always incentivized to look at how to make it functionally rich. So you really need to be deliberate as a product manager to ensure your product isn't boring. You also need to keep a constant eye to see what are both the consumer trends and specific vertical trends that happen in your business, so that you don't feel like a product of the past, right? Both of these things contribute to how you think about moments of wow and how, as a continuity, you build that in your product. And the hard thing is context, right? A lot of the times when when I spoke about the Gmail example, right? We understand what a moment of wow looks like. We understand what might put a smile in the face of our user, but sometimes building it out is hard, right? And business context, therefore, is very important. And when I say business context, the example I spoke about on the Gmail one is specifically not on like UX, right? It was not about a visual element on the product. It was actually helping you do your job better, right? So you need to understand the context of what your customers want, and business context should always trump how you think about these moments of wow. So it should not be restricted to a UI gimmick sometimes, or it should not be restricted to how you think of a nifty functionality. It should always be in the umbrella of what your business context is. And think of it like when you joke to somebody, right? Some jokes work with a set of audience. Some jokes don't work with a set of audience. What really changes is the context, right? The same applies to product building. So you need to understand the business context of what your users' life is, and then decide what qualifies as a moment of wow. And the second one is, again, that's why I said there's probably going to be a slight antidote to the entire data session. It's not only about vanity metrics, and I'm sure you will see more in the series where you'll talk about what is the right things to measure. Good usability will always trump vanity metrics, because metrics, like with most things in life, it is always paved with good intentions. But over time, it kind of becomes like religion, where you started the metric with something in mind, and over time, it takes a form of its own, where the metric in itself becomes a goal, whereas the metric was always a proxy for good usability, right? Because good usability is very fuzzy to define, and it's also very hard to scale within your team. So if one person has good taste, how do you really scale that across your team? And it's very hard, therefore, to formalize this type of tribal knowledge. Therefore, you resort to metrics, where you try to use them as good proxies in the hope that it will evolve over time to really capture the essence of what you meant as good taste. Now, a lot of the times, these metrics end up being vanity metrics. So to really build products with great moments in them, you need to always keep in mind that good usability trumps your vanity metrics, and you'll need to be able to differentiate between which metrics are vanity metrics and which aren't. So now, having understood that what qualifies as a moment of wow and why it's important, you see products everywhere, and every product manager would be able to relate to it, saying, but these are sometimes hard to build, right? It's hard to build even fully knowing what is the value. That's because the first one is measurable business value. When you think of some of these things, you won't be able to measure the direct business value. And there is a constant struggle that I've seen most product teams, including me as a product manager, that I face when I think of what is the value in delivering this one small thing. Maybe 10 of them put together over time makes it good, or is it just one of it? It's always very hard, therefore, to keep focus and say, hey, what is the measurable business value? And a lot of the times, the functional features and the pressure they create on your roadmap is very real. So irrespective of the size of your company and the maturity cycle of your product, where the roadmap pressure on functional capabilities is always very real. And it is a lot more louder. It has a lot more champions within the company. But as product manager, to fight for and think of these moments of wow is one of the axes that you need to keep in mind. And that's one of the things I've seen that makes it hard to build. And the third one is revenue impact, right? And you will have to measure growth. You will have to measure revenue impact, because as a business, a lot of the time, the business exists to create value for the shareholders and the employees, right? So you'll need to have revenue impact, but you cannot measure every single activity that you do with the lens of a revenue impact only. That will make it very hard to look at some of the intangible things till you get to a measurement framework, right? And my favorite analogy on this has always been, a lot of times our thoughts are limited by our vocabulary. If I speak English well, I can articulate some of the things better in English. Let's say I don't speak Hindi as well. If you ask me to speak about the same topic in Hindi, I will struggle. Right? It's the same way in how you measure things as well, right? Where to articulate the value of something, a lot of times you're constrained by your own ability to measure it. That doesn't mean what you're building is in itself not of value, but you're restricted by your ability to articulate it. So revenue, therefore, should be a very important North Star metric, but it should not be your only metric. And that will make it, if it is, then that will make it hard to really craft your product to build these moments of wow. And the last one, which I've seen as a constant struggle for product teams, is to really identify the right ones, right? Because as your product grows, and when you look at what your customers are talking about your product, what your competitors are doing, what you wish as a product manager, and your own vision for the future that you want to build, it's sometimes very hard to identify the right ones. One of the things that is hard in really building for this moment of wow is you shouldn't also be swayed away in building things that are vanity, right? Things that feel cool, and I use cool in a very broad way, which is that things that feel cool shouldn't really drive customer values should, right? So how do you get them? I believe data plus intuition is what can create the magic. And I feel very strongly about this, where I believe data driven is often very misunderstood. And therefore, we've really given it a bad reputation in some way, right? Data informed is a much better framework to look at. And what I mean by data informed is simply that when you're trying to understand your own business space, where your product is playing in and what your customer problems are, it's always important to start with a hypothesis rather than starting from what the current data tells you. Because your ability to interpret the data, your ability to measure the right metrics get in the way. So therefore, it's important to start from a testable hypothesis and use data to inform yourself, to ensure you're not going into a rabbit hole that you lead your team into a place where you're not building something of value. So being data informed is far superior to making data drive the decision. And I feel as a product manager, you're really in the business of taking decisions, right? And as long as you get 8 or 9 out of 10 right, you'll do well as a product manager. But and even in a given day, from your most strategic decisions to your most tactical decisions, there are enough decisions for you to take, and you cannot use data as a clutch to avoid taking decisions, right? So think of it like a well-balanced meal. You need to look at data, but you still need to trust your own intuition. And as a product manager, intuition is like any other skill, right? You will need to build on it, be deliberate about it. And this is the best way for you to create the magical moments. You'll need to, the products that build, and I can give you tons of examples within my own product and other products that I use and see, where these moments are most likely driven by a hypothesis and then backed by data, as opposed to only being driven by data, because data always gives you the picture for what happened already, right? The very fact that you're measuring something means that you know the value of it. So if you're trying to create something new, the trailing indicator will not help you. So that said, how to build this intuition, and where do you start? And it's a constant learning process, irrespective of how long you've been as a PM in a particular space. I believe it's a transferable skill. You can be a PM in a large enterprise one day, move to a startup another day, or completely move from domains, right? I think Sai was talking about, I started out as an embedded engineer and then building for construction companies and then web applications and B2B SaaS now. I believe a really transferable skill is focusing on what your customers want. And again, here you need to distill down what your customers tell you vis-a-vis what they want, right? So a few things that you can practically apply are looking at customer win stories. Always read the entire story and look at it as a story, right? Look at how somebody made the decision to use your product. As hard as it is sometimes to imagine, people don't go through completely rational ways to decide on what products to use, right? There is always an aspect of one or two things staying with someone. And especially if you're in a B2B context, you need to understand what drives your decision maker and what are the key goals they're focused on. So listen to the stories on how something gets started, how they evaluated the product, and what really eventually ended up being the reason why you won. So that's a really good place to start to fine-tune your intuition. Talk to your sales team. Ask what they love about your product. Now, this is a slightly double-edged sword, right? Your sales team, when given access to a product manager, will want to tell about all the 1,000 things that you can build for them, right? And believe me, the list will be very long. But the trick is still to ensure we can talk with them, right? And they should enjoy talking with you as a product manager and look for what they love in your product. Because as much as you can look at how you want to grow the product organically via in-product techniques, your sales team and all your field folks, all your customer-facing teams are your best, are really your best bet to scale everything that you're thinking, right? So they need to be your friends. They need to be champions that can relay the same thinking that you have while you're building the product. So ask them what they love about the product. And more important than that, listen to their demos. A lot of the times, you will catch that even your best salesperson, there is a change in how their voice moves up and down. When they're talking about the products, parts of your product that they're not proud of, or they think is less than perfect, you will see their voice drop. You'll see they're not as confident talking about it. It isn't really their go-to thing when they really begin. So look for those cues. Those are examples that you can fix. Those are areas of the product that may or may not be captured in your aggregate metrics, but it will quickly show up when you listen to that demo on. And this is like the first time as a kid, if you start spelling complex words, right? You wonder whether there is two S in Mississippi or one S in Mississippi when you write the word for the first time. You think of what you do as a kid, right? You'll write it in a way that people can't make out the actual spelling. You'll write it in a way it's so confusing to read. The equivalent of that in a sales demo is somebody's voice going down, where they're trying to move away, where they're trying to quickly jump to the next topic. Look for those cues. Those are subtle cues, but that will really help you build your intuition as a product manager on what and which part of your product you need to focus on. And once you've done a few things to understand your domain well, and you've started forming these hypotheses in your mind, and you have an opinion on which are things that you should be building to specifically look at delight for your customer. There will be two more things that you need to overcome. Again, this is not something that I claim to have completely overcome. It's a constant thing to keep an eye on, right? The first one is your overall consistency and product design principles. They are always less important than your customers' work, because you'll need to understand the day in the life of a customer and see how you can make it better for them. Sometimes your own need for consistency within the product needs to take a backseat. It's very hard as a PM to give in sometimes, but it is very important. You will need to realize that it is less important than what your customer wants to achieve. And there'll be a lot of internal constraints, and there's a whole spectrum of is it hard to build? Is that the right ROI? Are there multiple teams that need to be convinced? There are so many internal constraints, and depending on the maturity of the product and size of your company, this will keep compounding. But it's important to always keep in mind that your internal constraints are less important than your customer's convenience. It's something that as a product manager, you are the champion for internally, right? You'll need to keep being the advocate for this. And this is a good fight. Both of these are good fights, and there needs to be a champion for it. And there's nobody better than the product manager to be a champion for both of this, right? So once you identify, you have an intuition, and you have hopefully testable hypothesis, you should constantly fight both of this and ensure that you can go along the path. So how do you go about building? Great teams build great product. It's probably the most cliched thing. I'm sure that's a tautology nobody would disagree to. But there's a nuanced balance in that, right? If you want a great engineer, you want a great designer, you want a great marketer, then that means as a product manager, you need to ensure that you can give the right space for all of these functions to make this a great team. A lot of times, everybody wants the best people in their team, but they're not willing to give the space, right? So if you're a product manager, you need to give the space to a designer, to your marketer, to an engineer, to be as much as part of building this out, because you're facilitating this and you're helping take this to market. You're not owning it, right? From a perspective of you're not the only decision maker on it. I think that is the nuance in understanding that great teams build great products. You, as a product manager, you're first among equals. You'll need to get it in a collaborative way, and at the same time ensure the entire team shares the pride in building it, and everybody is committed to doing it. And that will help you make the right trade-offs. It'll help you make. It'll help you keep the team motivated to really look for these things and build them, right? And you'd want to build a team that is not dependent on one person saying what to build, right? And I called out two different things because they get talked about very little when you talk about building moments of wow. Fast is a feature. If you have a performant product that loads and it's super snazzy, now that's a really good feature. As a product manager, even if it's unintentional at the beginning that you didn't really optimize for it, that's a feature you should protect, right? And you'll start really feeling the pain that causes the most customer frustration once you lose it. It's like good health, right? Good performance on a product is exactly like your physical health. Probably don't appreciate it enough while you have it. So fast is a feature. So when you think your moments of wow, see if your product can really be fast, right? And that's really a joy to use. And bug free is a killer wow. Now, the product that I head here at Freshworks is our flagship product. It's our longest product. It's the first product we launched as a company. So we have a lot of bugs. We make a lot of jokes about we are flattening the curve on the bugs every week, but the curve still keeps going up, right? And that's just the reality of it. But if you can rid your product of the nagging issues, keep an eye on it. That is a killer wow. That's a wow that might not be glamorous, but if you really look at customer value, that continues to be a killer wow, right? So that's something that I want you to look at when you think of great products. So with that, I'm going to pause. Questions we can take in any order. Sai, you can let me.
Yeah, is there a significance for this picture? I'm trying to, maybe you can help us summarize this instead of everybody's training in and looking at what were you trying to communicate with this?
So, because this was going to be the question section, I thought the questions will come in so many ways, right?
Okay.
So we can, at the end of the meeting, maybe bucket the questions into different one.
Yeah.
But I think the larger point is mostly around the idea of questions is a process of discovery, right? Also for the person asking it and for the person answering it.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, when you articulate something, you actually end up understanding it better yourself as well. So I think the questions are as much my attempt at knowing the topic that you're asking better, as much as it's your attempt to getting clarity on the answer, right? So
very smart, very smart. Well, thanks for that. I think there are a lot of things that I loved, at least personally, about the talk. One, there are a couple of things. One is your titles are superb. I think the title communicates essentially the summary of what you wanted to convey that, right? So, and there are a few things that I made note of, which I wanted to summarize and, probably even paraphrase it a little bit for everyone here. I think what you said is, of course, business software doesn't have to be boring, right? And I think it's not just about intention anymore. It is becoming an imperative, right? So a lot of users entering the businesses are now expecting the same level of experience and ease of use and everything as consumer applications, right? Given the new age workforce that joins and everything. So it's more of an imperative. And you said metrics are important, but don't make metrics as a goal, right? And don't have vanity metrics just for the heck of it, because a lot of people talk about metrics. It is cool to talk about metrics, and don't just be cognizant of them, and pick the ones that matter most to your product and your business, right?
And this is something that should evolve, right? What was a good metric when the product was 1 year in the market, vis-a-vis when the product is 8 years in the market? It better evolve because the segment you're serving and where you are as a product will significantly change. And that's where a lot of the metrics are misunderstood, sadly. It's almost looked upon as dogma, where this is always what we used to measure, but that's we've also grown, right? So,
yeah. No, absolutely. I think important point is to keep in mind that metrics will change as you evolve, as the product evolves, as the business evolves, and choosing the right metrics at right point in time, right? Now, of course, metrics comes into picture when you start collecting data, when you start using data. And you said, don't get sucked into this data-driven decision alone, but be informed with data. And I think I like the fact that you said, you start with a hypothesis and then look at the data, use the data and experiment, and then make a decision, rather than concluding without a hypothesis and an experiment, looking at the data and say, this is what data is telling us, and hence let's go with that, right? Now, all of these things, the reason why I'm so glad to summarize this, these are coming from trenches. These are coming from, experience, that prescriptive nuggets, if you will, for everyone, right? The other thing is, I love this one. And I think I'm going to pay more attention to this as well in my career, in my growth, is listen to the demos, catch the hesitation, right? I think, it's not just the product managers who are giving demos when the pre-sales or the sales is doing it. You notice at a certain point in time, if the tone changes, if they go low, as you said, those are the areas, maybe either you want to enable them better, or there might be hesitation in them about the product itself. And so areas for improvement on that, right? For everyone who works hard in products, right from engineering, products, marketing, everything. So often this comes up that, hey, you know what? Yeah, I think it is useful for customer, but it is so hard to do. It is so difficult to do. So your statement about your constraints are less important than customer convenience, I think hits the nail on its head, right? So while it is difficult, sometimes you have to do a lot of explanation and a lot of cajoling and a lot of coming together. That's essentially the essence of it, right? So awesome. I think at least the ones that I made note, hopefully that brings in. Now we'll get into the questions in a minute, but now slowly I want your perspective, Girish, on how you use data today in your organization, right? So for example, I know Freshworks has an AI engine and it's called Freddy AI, right? So, and maybe you could help us understand how Freddy AI in your context, in the product that you head and lead the team, helps the customers, or rather how you use it to build it, right? To solve the customer pain points. But before we get to that, I want to take a really quick poll from the audience to understand what they think about where data and data science especially is used in the product management function, right? So this is about, what is the, I'm sure there are many different uses of data science. And in the last 3-4 days, we've had some amazing sessions with applied data science use cases and everything. So I encourage everyone on the call to take about 10 seconds to view. We really, maybe we should target about 85% voting here, right? And I think that gives us a really good insight, both to Girish, but to ourselves, all of us, on what do you think is the most popular use of data science in product management? Often we hear teams and product managers, product leaders talking about, we do data-driven decisions, but in what context, right? So while the team votes on it, while the participants votes on it, Girish, maybe you could give us a little bit context and example-driven approach of Freddy AI and how you used data to create something that helps customers.
Right. So two different questions, right? So first one is, how do we use data in general within the company for the decisions that we want to be building? So broadly, all of Freshworks is in the B2B space. We're building customer engagement software for different teams in a enterprise, right? So we look at data to understand by segment of customers, by usage and what we need to build. And because largely we're building workflow software across like customer support or IT teams or HR teams and sales teams and so on. So we look at what will make the persona of a salesperson or a customer support person or a manager in a particular function, what will make their life easy. And we look at data to understand what are the tasks to be done there. And that's our first input. So that's something that we look at. And also because AI in our products is primarily catering to, we believe, the best way that you can build AI embedded in products. AI is a lot like a good UX. 10 years back, good UX was considered a separate feature that you have on top of your product. AI is probably a little bit in that stage currently where you think of it as something you build on top of what you have.
It's like an add-on, it's like patched on top of that.
I think, but we are getting to the stage, and it's coming probably fast at us, that we're getting to a stage where it's going to be integral to how you think, right? So how a beautiful product became the norm with millennials in the workforce. I do believe an intelligent product will also start becoming the norm a little bit, right? So our Freddy across all of our products is catered therefore to make humans and bots come together better in different functions, right? So in customer support, it's about how much can the bot handle and because where you require good judgment and empathy, it's still better left to a human. I still think we are far away from the robots rising to that level, right? So I think, so you can take off what is mundane out of the human and have bots handle that. Then the things that require empathy, judgment, and things that are more complex, then your team can really give the personal touch. So that's probably how we look at embedding AI features in our products, and that's why Freddy the platform and our investments along those lines.
Excellent. I think so essentially right now, or at least a year ago, AI looked cool enough to add to what, powered by AI or something, but rapidly that's becoming so interwoven that, nobody really wants to hear as a customer, as a consumer. We all really don't want to hear that I'm being helped by a machine. I'm being helped by a program, right? We all want to interact with humans, but it gets so interwoven and so beautiful that we don't give it a second thought, but essentially, interwoven machine, artificial intelligence and things built into it. So there are some interesting questions that are coming in. Rohit Nagpal asks, if you have a lot of customers, right? And I'm sure, Freshworks has about 150,000, 200 customers, small, medium enterprises across the world, or probably even more. How do you even identify what those moments of wow are to build, right? And with a large customer base, or do you pick up with existing features and start tweaking them to say, let's create a wow moment here, or is it altogether new?
So, like some of the things I did have in the presentation, it is a combination of looking at customer stories, looking at how our own support team uses our product, looking at what our customers say. So it comes from a testable hypothesis from those conversations. And we use, so we have more than 200,000 customers globally. So we use that to really see, is this used by so many people? Because one of the advantages that you have with a large customer base is if you ship something out, you get almost instant feedback, right? Because so many people are going to be using it. So we do start with, and we've also gone through multiple ways of trying to action this, right? Where we've tried approaches where just one team looks at it. We've tried approaches where we ask every team to look at it. And I think depending on so many other dynamics where you, on the size of the product, on individual product manager, designer preferences, etc., you'll always have a mix of some teams will do a little more of this, some teams will do a little less of this.
Sorry to interject. Do you have an example in your case where you would say you rolled out a feature and then you obviously collected information about the usage of that feature and then realized that, okay, either this is not being used or this is being used in a way that we didn't intend it to be used? And so how do we make it better to create that wow moment to the users? Is there any example that you could illustrate it with us?
Yeah, I'm thinking without the need to understand the product, what can be a good example? But I'll tell you our general thing that we look at, right? So when we launch something, we look at adoption because we have enough instrumentation in place to understand at an aggregate level, anonymized aggregate level, how many people are using something, and in some things where there are different stages, where do they drop off, etc. That gives us the first insight, right? At an aggregate level, first to know, is this not even discovered? Because a lot of times when you build, especially in enterprise software, 90% of your features are not used by 90% of your customers, right? That's just the reality of it. So you'll, first thing that the data will tell you is it discovered enough, right? And that actually is a starting point to even know the impact. So we look at that, we look at, is it discovered enough by the right segment of customers, and then see in the funnel, what do they use and what do they not use. And one of the big advantages we also have is, we are a customer support product. We also support our customers using our own product. So when we get feedback, our support team is a good channel for our feedback. We also look at feedback that comes in from customers as one of the axes to look at to see what is working and what isn't.
Okay, so a couple of questions on, I'm trying to paraphrase here, is do you have, in your organization, is the data team or the so-called data team, is that a dedicated data team from which all the product teams rely on, or is it more of a horizontal where every product team, there is an embedded data team in it?
More of the latter, because we also have platforms that can be used by every PM. So there is access to data, but we also have focused data teams for a few of the programs, right, where it is necessary to have one. And also most of the times the team structure and the strategy around, do you have a central team or a distributor team, etc., changes a lot with business priorities. A lot of sense on, is there increased focus on something? But I think what I've largely seen work, both at Freshworks and otherwise, is you need to have access and people should know where to go, right? And it should be easy enough, because with data, one of the other interesting nuances is, I think on a first principle level, everybody would want to look at data, but if you really don't go with the question, right, data is not very helpful. It will just be so many numbers on it. You'll see it, but you don't know what to do with it, right? So you might also need to ensure people start with the right questions to ask and then start looking at data. Otherwise, you look at a lot of data and you can feel good about it, but it might not be actionable enough for you to take the next step.
So I think, that kind of a line, is similar to what the question one of the audience, Anil Vignesh from Nielsen is asking, and I'm sure he comes from the user experience or user research background. For a long time, when we said create moments of wow, often it was understood that you create such a beautiful experience, user experience, and that becomes a moment of wow. And of course, user experience heavily relies on user research, talking to customers, understanding their needs, and then bringing those things and incorporating them into the journey, right? But now, and that has not gone away, obviously, but now one of the dominant ways, and as you also explained before, is now you instrument the way the products, features are used, how they are used, and you collect information, and then you start studying those, right? And so, which do you also use a balance of both, or is it more on looking at the information on data collected through instrumentation and saying, looks like, a customer is struggling to use this particular feature in the product because it's taking them 3 seconds as opposed to what we designed it for 1 second, and hence we need to improve this. Does that balance work?
Right. I mean, so you will have to instrument and you still need to do user research, but one does not necessarily exclude the other, right? And also, when you look at trying to understand aggregate metrics, the challenge also is, especially in B2B, not so much in direct to consumer, because the broad use cases would be very similar. Like if you think of, let's say, my Google Pay app, right? Almost everybody uses it for a very well-defined use case, but that wouldn't be the case with a B2B software where teams would use it differently. So to really know what are the intended use cases is a bit of a discovery. And therefore, user research and direct customer stories cannot fully be replaced with aggregate metrics, because otherwise it might actually sway you into making slightly subpar decisions. But it has to be a balance of both. You need to look at aggregate metrics too, because you also don't want to have a lot of recency bias, right? Like you don't want it to be done because you saw it with one customer and you feel very passionate about it. We're all guilty of it sometimes. So you want to ensure that as a PM, once you make up your mind, that you have enough conviction to see it through. But before you really make up your mind, you double guess yourself enough by looking at enough aggregate data to really guide your decision.
Right. Super. One often asked question is, especially, you mentioned product management. Essentially, the role is to make decisions. The job is to make decisions, informed by data and customer discussions, understanding the customer, all of that. And now when you're talking about data-informed decisions, when you're picking a team of product managers, right? Are you looking for somebody who has done traditional product management for some time? When I say traditional, of course, I'm not talking about 15 years ago or even maybe that, but somebody who comes with the typical traditional product management skills or now with more digital skills, right? Digital product management, where more of instrumentation, feature, flags, capturing data, analyzing that data, looking at making that decision. So is it more from data analytics, data science to product management, or a product manager picking up the data skills? Which one would you prefer, or do you look for mostly?
My team is a mix of everyone, right? It has engineers become product managers. I'm an engineer becoming product manager. That's the route I came in. There are sales engineers who become product managers. There are customer support people who become product managers, marketers who sometimes want to try product management. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if you understand the domain enough, and if you have a taste for problem solving, you can always attempt it. I do believe the ability to analyze data and ability to make decisions is a skill, right? Mm-hmm. So and with all the skills, it will come with doing. You'll need to exercise it enough to try and do it, even if you make a few mistakes along the road. So I've had a mix. I've also seen like a few traits that generally, irrespective of the background, right? People are comfortable taking decisions, and I think that's a very key skill. And also, a lot of times you need to also be the person who can rally to a decision. Meaning, even if it's not a decision that you can completely take yourself, can you have the right people and move them to make the decision, right? Like if you want your engineer to make a choice on something on architecture, you might not have the expertise to actually make the decision in that case, but you need to be the forcing function to make that decision. I think those are skills that are very transferable, irrespective of where you start from. So can you be the first among equals quickly? And can you also be the person who can drive the consensus and move on? So I think those are things that broadly apply.
Yeah. Now, the reason there is a corollary to that, right? And if you're a person in that role, working with engineers, working with data science teams, and you're going to collaborate with each and every one of them, it is expected that this person who is prioritizing things or defining things or defining the outcomes should understand at least a little bit of data science and data analytics or data engineering or any of these things. Is that a fair understanding that this person should have working understanding or knowledge of these?
Yes, and I think that also extends to engineering, right? If you want to be a good product manager, you'll need to understand engineering enough because you need to empathize with your engineers too. On if something is hard, they probably are saying it because it is hard, right? So, so I think an empathy to user should also translate empathy to your own team.
Yeah.
The only caveat there is sometimes all of us are guilty of really extending the empathy to the extent of just giving into the constraint, right? So that's a constant struggle, but you need to have a working knowledge at least at a block diagram level of how some of these things work. Otherwise, it's very hard to really imagine and see what you can build.
Awesome. Well, that's all we had time for, and really appreciate you, Girish, taking your time.